Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'm so happy to have everyone here. Um, I have a different panel from people that I normally have. There isn't a single person on the panel that I have had on a stream with me before. So that is going to make things a bit interesting. Um, so I have lots of new friends today. Today we have with us two believers. We have Doug Carpenter and Charlie B. And one other unbeliever is Stephen Tiger. Jay from the Nevermore Tavern is supposed to be joining us as well. And I don't know if he's gotten caught up at work or what, but he seems to be a bit late. So he will probably be joining us in a bit. And Faye the Most Gracious was supposed to be here as well, but unfortunately Faye is not well, and Faye was not able to make it today. So today our topic is heaven real? And we have a panel here that is, as I mentioned, both believers and unbelievers. And normally my panels are all atheist. So I am going to ask people in the chat to please be polite to the believers. If they say something you don't like, you are welcome to disagree, but please disagree in an agreeable manner. And with that much said, let's go ahead and start by introducing ourselves. Doug, tell us a little bit about yourself.
My name is Doug Carpenter. I am a pastor. I've been one for about 10 years. In fact, 10 years in December. I will graduate in December with my Master's of Divinity. I am currently a high school math teacher, and I have a Master's of Education as well. And so I enjoy teaching tremendously. I enjoy the Bible. And it's amazing, when I got into seminary, I thought that I would just learn so much. And all I found out is that I still don't know what I don't know. And that's a lot. And so, if anything, what knowledge can do to you is humble you and make you realize how much is out there that, again, you can't even fathom. And so anyway, it is a pleasure to be here. And I've been friends with Steve for a while, and he's a great guy, and I look forward to just talking with you all. And so anyway, that's a little bit about me.
Okay. Charlie, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I'm not a pastor. I'm not theologically trained in any way. I am an animator, cartoon animator, so that's been my career, to do drawings for my whole life. I was born into a Catholic family and baptized, went through all the stuff of like being an altar boy, singing in church, helping organize retreats as I got a little older, singing in church again. It was probably around the 9/11 tragedy, around that area. I actually, even before that, I was kind of a preacher in that I went to deliver communion to the seniors' residence where my mother-in-law was. So I had to give a little homily every day, and it got me kind of working on sort of doing some research, that sort of thing. But 9/11 kind of, it made me understand that what one believes has a serious impact in their life and in the lives of others as well. I, at a certain point, decided that standing in the pews of the Catholic Church and disagreeing with a lot of theology was just voting with my presence. So I decided to vote with my feet. I didn't agree with views on sexuality, on married priests, on female priests, on a lot of different things in the Catholic sort of dogma. So I decided to leave the church, and with the 9/11 tragedy, started to research both my own faith, a little bit of Islam, I've read a lot of the new atheists, Dawkins and Harris and Hitchens and um, your friend Matt Dillahunty as well. I've listened to a few things of his, sort of doing a lot of research. So it's been about 15 years that I've been really questioning, answering the question for myself that Jesus asked his disciples, and who do you say that I am? So looking through all kinds of atheistic perspectives and faith perspectives to find out what that means for myself. So, which brings me to my Twitter engagement with a lot of atheistic thought, and that's where I met Stephen as well. I quickly realized that debating theology over Twitter is somewhat of a useless trying to get across an idea in 120 or 240 characters or whatever it is. And I also realized that there's a lot of injury. There's a lot of people that have been hurt by religion. And engaging in the conversation, I stepped on a few toes here and there and realized that it's not a great place to do that sort of thing. But what it has helped me do, and listening to all the atheists have helped me to do, is to really truly understand what I believe, and I have no authority in that other than this is what I believe myself. So that's kind of where I'm at today, and Stephen invited me to have a chat with you, Callie, and looking forward to where this heads.
Okay. Steve, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I have no background in religious training whatsoever. I wasn't raised with any religion. I wasn't interested in it. But a couple of different experiences I had made me start thinking that maybe there's more to the universe than just the physical realm that surrounds us. One was my discovery of classical music, because certain pieces moved me so profoundly that I could hardly believe that this is just a matter of, well, somebody goes to conservatory and they learn music and they write music. Lots of people are well trained in conservatories. And then there's Beethoven and Bruckner and Brahms and Mahler and so many others. Their achievements are inexplicable to me. The other experience that I had was sometime later, was coming across some of the teachings attributed to Jesus in the Greek scriptures, which I found very challenging. And so there came a time a few decades ago when, as an adult, I went to churches, a variety of Christian churches, for a period of about 3 years. I was actually looking for faith. I didn't find it. But I did learn a lot about belief and the nature of belief and what I could not accept about church doctrine. What I could not accept was what I saw as self-contradiction in doctrine on sin and salvation. And I was writing notes to myself during those years, trying to figure it out, trying to reconcile what I was being taught with what I said, well, yeah, that could be true. I wasn't looking for proof that it's true. Absolutely not. I never was. I wasn't looking for proof that God exists. I just wanted to see if it's possible. And the reason I couldn't find faith is because, not because I didn't find proof, but because I did find evidence that what I was being taught was false. If something is self-contradictory, it's false. And that's what I found. So some years ago, I began working on a book which finally came out as Doctrine Impossible. And therein, I outlined why I find Christian doctrine on sin and salvation untenable. Not just unprovable, but untenable. And because of my background as having spent my career, I'm retired now, but having spent my career as a professional writer in medical journals, I was accustomed to presenting technical material in a very logical way that will be clear to the audience. And even though I spent my career as a writer, writing the book was the most difficult job I've ever done, the most difficult writing job I've ever done.
Okay.
That's basically where I am and what my position has been.
Okay, very good. Jay, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello. Sorry for coming in late. I work
problem.
third shift, so it's getting up. Ooh, crap. So apologize for that. I'm Jay. I'm from the Nevermore Tavern YouTube channel. I'm a Buddhist. I come into Buddhism about 10 years ago. I wasn't raised on any kind of faith, but I did find that at one point I was trying to find myself. So looking at different religions, I looked into some Islam and Christianity and whatnot, and Buddhism for me seemed to fit with the self actualization and whatnot. So that's in the studyings and the teachings of the Buddha. Just for me, it felt right. So as of lately, I strayed away from it for a while. But as of last couple months, I've been really back into it again. So yeah, that's pretty much me in a nutshell. I don't find anything wrong with religion itself. My biggest thing is I don't like the people that are extremely dogmatic about it. I don't have an issue if people are Christian or Muslim or Hindu or whatnot. My issue is those who are extremely dogmatic, and that's where I tend to come in. Like I have a gentleman that comes on my show quite often, Ross Burns. He's from the Burns Eye View. He's a Christian apologist, and I get along with him really well because he's not dogmatic about it. So that's where I sit. I don't mind talking religion with people, as long as, like I said, they're not trying to thrust it upon you and tell you this is it. This is 100%. As long as you have an open mind and willing to talk, I don't have an issue talking with people about it.
Okay. Very okay. Let's let the people who are on the positive side of the proposal go first, as even though this is not a debate, that's generally how it is done in a debate, because you want to support your position before you have someone that's going to try to be going against that position. So Doug or Charlie, which one of you would like to go first?
I look like Doug froze.
Doug froze.
Yeah. Okay.
I had to switch, and so there we go. Can you guys hear me now? My Wi-Fi went crazy, and so Jay, I am so sorry I missed all of your intro, and so I apologize about that. But yeah, just all of a sudden I noticed that my now my point of reference is here. Oh, all right. So I think I'm good, and so anyway, I apologize about poor Wi-Fi.
You're pretty loud, Doug. Have you got a volume control?
Sorry.
Part of that might be that I've got him. Okay, now I had him in the stream twice. Say something again, Doug.
Hello?
Okay, no, it is still pretty loud.
Okay. Then my mic is, let me turn my mic down.
You just reduce the volume on the computer.
Okay.
Yeah, that's better.
All right, great. Okay, I think are we good now?
Still a bit hot.
Okay.
I am so sorry. Usually I am.
Okay.
So, all right, there we go. All right. Okay. What about now?
It's still kind of hot, but if you lean back in your chair, you might be good. There, that's better.
Oh.
That's better.
All right. So actually, if I go off screen, y'all will be able to No, I'm just teasing.
Oh.
I go away, y'all will be able to hear me better. So.
Okay. Did you want to go first, Doug, then? Or Charlie, do you want to go first?
I think Doug might have missed that introduction.
Oh, okay.
So I'll go first. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, Charlie.
Basically, we're starting with the positive side of life. The topic, as I understand, is: do you believe in a heaven? Is there a heaven that we can understand? My understanding comes from, first of all, a personal sense of it. I'm probably twice shouldn't be here. I almost died as a 9-month-old. Had a not major surgery, but a groundbreaking surgery where I had pneumonia and they had to cut a hole into my pleurosac to allow my lungs to breathe while they gave me antibiotics to keep me alive.
Let me stop you for just a moment. And that is, I muted your mic, Doug, because it was getting some feedback from it. And I will unmute it anytime you want to talk, or if you want to make a comment, just raise your hand and I'll unmute your mic. Okay, sorry. Go ahead, Charlie.
So then the 9-month surgery gave me complications. When I was 4 years old, I had a large lump of infection in my back. They had to open me up, let that drain. And when I woke up from surgery, I scratched under the what was not stitched and nearly bled to death. And I have a memory of that at 4 years old, where I felt like I was leaving my crib, calling for the nurse, and then no memory at all. So I believe I was rescued from not being here a couple of times. My experiences, my personal experiences, and they're not necessarily life after death experiences. They don't prove that there's a heaven or anything, but to me, they're experiences that could be coincidence, but they're significant for me. In the summer of '75, when I was back home working between college years, my very first girlfriend from grade 2 and her sister were killed in a tragic car accident. So she would have been about 18 years old. I went to the funeral, felt compelled because I had this early connection with her. They had done some readings from the book Jonathan Livingston Seagull that talked about raising above the clouds to have a better perspective on life. When I left the church, this was in late August, I guess, or early August. There was a thin covering of clouds over the sun and a perfect halo around the sun that lasted for about 5 minutes. Coincidence. My mother passed away when she was 58. On the way back from the funeral, we were in the limousine and there was a pigeon, which pigeons don't fly all that fast, but it followed the car for about 3 minutes. And we were going at least 60K. And for me, that was kind of a sign from my mom. When my dad passed away 3 weeks later, after the wake and singing and being at the house with friends, I walked out at night, and it felt to me as I looked up there, I was looking underneath the northern lights and seeing geometric light patterns in the sky, which I've never seen before or since. My brother was at the hospital when my dad passed away, and he was sitting and waiting. He had an aneurysm. He felt a tap on his shoulder and a brush against the back of his head, and 5 minutes later, the doctor came out and said, "Your dad has passed away." My grandmother passed away in 2004. She was 96. It was in December, January. On our way to the funeral, which was up outside of the country, there was, I don't know if you know hoarfrost. Hoarfrost is where the frost covers the trees in white. So as we drove towards where the funeral was, the trees were just this magical white color. After the funeral, we left the funeral, and as I looked towards the sun, the low sun, there was about a coin-sized cloud in a clear sky that was reflecting light and rainbow. And I told the family, your grandma's saying goodbye. So these are coincidental events that I've noticed at death times. And I know coincidence doesn't prove anything, but often I see things in the sky when significant events happen. About life after death, nobody's been back to say so. If you believe the scriptures, then Jesus has. Anthropologically, it seems like Homo sapiens, or the Homo sapien development through evolution, has had some kind of ritual around death. And if you look at that over time, Lucy was buried in a cave that was like really difficult to get to. Neanderthals had burial rites. The terracotta warriors, like 500 years before Christ, it seems to me that all cultures have had a sense of either a ritual around death, either wishful thinking that there was life after death, or there's something that humanity and Homo sapiens and sapiens in general have perceived about this experience of death, that there may or may not be something beyond death. I think every religious system that we know of today, Buddhism included, has some sense of an afterlife. And I'll leave it there and let maybe Doug carry on from there.
Does anyone have any questions for Charlie?
No, I think that I think that the event that's very articulate in an eloquent kind of way, and I appreciate that you didn't make any assertions that, well, therefore this is true. I think that that's an appropriate way to approach topics like this, is to see what might be true, what's meaningful to us individually.
I would agree with you on that. Yeah. Doug, did you have anything to add to that, or something you want to say separately?
Well, when I think of heaven, I don't think of it as this grand place with streets of gold and mansions and all the things that we hear about, because how can something be made in the spiritual realm that is using physical properties? And so when I ever think of heaven, and this is where I think this is more, again, I'm now, unfortunately, Steve, I'm having to come from the assertion that there is a God. And so, and not that this is the debate for that, I'm just telling you from my own vantage point that heaven is the place where God exists. And yes, we are given a little picture of it, a little description, but we're also told that at some point there will be a new heaven and a new earth, and everything that is old will pass away. And I truly, if you look from in Scripture, wherever God has come to man, there is always this desire to be in the presence with man, for man to be in the presence with God. And again, this is another assertion that, and I would just like to give a quick plug to Steve's book, I read that. I finished his book this year, Doctrine Impossible, and it asked some incredible questions that I have had to answer for myself. Okay, when coming to the thought of salvation and redemption and sin. And so it's a fantastic, it's a great book. Whether you're
Sound cut off.
Oh, no, that was, I was trying to type an answer to somebody in the chat and I accidentally.
oh, okay. I thought, oh no, I'm too loud. I'm really trying to make sure that you get my inside voice. But just like and like I was saying, God has always wanted to be within the presence of man, but man has somehow conflicted that. And so if you've ever seen the movie Air Force One, and if you haven't, spoiler, okay. In Air Force One, the cargo plane that is sent to rescue the people off the dying 727, they changed their call sign to Air Force One at the very end, because whatever plane the president is on, that is Air Force One. And so when I think about heaven, and I think about it being in God's presence, in his place where he resides, there is some grace that is given to us to be able to go there. I've talked and met with Steve before, and we've talked about if he's ever down here, hey, come, love to have you for dinner. Okay, now not that people would want to come to Sequatchie, Tennessee, but all of you are welcome. But if we have someone that we don't know, one of those lovely people that we've had those conversations with in 240 characters or less, debating life-altering theology and philosophy, some of those people we would be like, no, you're not invited to my home. In fact, you probably shouldn't have a phone or be allowed near electricity or something. It just astounds me. And so I think that God, wherever God is, that's where heaven is. And with that, we can not only experience it here, or I should say, we not only experience it in the afterlife, which again, I'm having to make an assertion that could be on a different show, but making the assertion of the afterlife that yes, heaven can be experienced, but yet also in my own life, I have found that heaven is not where I have experienced it here on earth. It's not been in the good, wonderful days. You know, you just have that picture perfect day in your mind. You're walking around with your family. You're just having a great time. It ends with a perfect meal. And I mean, you have those days. But I don't think that's what heaven is like. I truly believe that when I have felt God's presence, therefore I have felt heaven in reality to me, is when I have been in the low places and that unexpected hand help that comes out of nowhere that you don't expect. And a quick story, my wife is a caretaker, and one of the families she takes care of is for a gentleman down in Birmingham and his wife. And he suffered a massive stroke, should have been life-ending stroke. But and he was also a pastor, and he was preparing for Christmas Eve service. And that night, in the when they were at the hospital, they didn't know what was going to take place. They didn't even know if he would make it the next day. His wife said there was a African American lady that, as I was standing at the vending machines wondering what I was going to get for a snack, an African American lady came up, put her hand on my shoulder, and said, you will get through this, and he will get through this. And gave her a great big hug and left. She has no idea where she came from, no idea about her instances. Those are the experiences of heaven, and very similar to what Charlie was talking about, to where those experiences are what give us an idea of what the presence of God is. And so that's how I equate heaven.
Okay, very good. Jay, what are your thoughts? And before you start, Jay, I'm going to mute you again, Doug, just so we can hear Jay better. And just raise your hand if you want me to unmute you, okay? Go ahead,
Well,
Jay.
I don't believe in heaven itself.
Okay.
As a Buddhist, we're more concerned about this life and trying to reach enlightenment, inner peace. The Buddha teaches that there are many different stages in your life called the samsara. And so, take for example, if you're feeling good and you're doing good, then you will be surrounded by what they call heavenly beings. If you're angry and violent, then you're going to be surrounded yourself with evil beings, different things like that. So heaven in Buddhism isn't really a place. It's more like a state of mind kind of thing. So like I said, if you're feeling good and you surround yourself with good people, then you're in heaven. When Buddha's got a great analogy, I don't know if anybody's heard it. It's the poison arrow analogy. If you get shot with a poison arrow, you're not going to you're not going to dwell on who shot it. What can you do to stop the poison? The first thing you're going to do is pull out the arrow. So you deal with the now and what's going on now, and not dwell about what's going on after you die, because it's not about later, it's about now. To find yourself and better yourself and push yourself to reach that enlightenment. For me, I've seen videos and I've talked to different people, and I can understand where a lot of especially Christians will come with this idea of a heaven, what happens in the afterlife. And I think personally, for me, they're scared of death, and they want to know what's going to happen after you die. There's nothing wrong with death. There's nothing wrong with nothing happening before you die. Nothing that concerns you personally happened before you were here, so it shouldn't concern you after you're gone. In Buddhism, we do believe in rebirth as a next step towards your enlightenment. But that's about it, really. When it comes to the spiritual realms, you'll continue to be reborn as you're taking your steps towards enlightenment. Some people will reach it on their first try. Others will take many, many lifetimes to reach it. But the goal is there. So this thought for me of, well, I'm going to die. I'm going to go stand up at the gates and I'm going to, talk with God, and then God will either let me in or send me down. Basically, I don't see how that's I don't want to say feasible, because that's not right. I don't understand the thinking with that you're going to go to a different place and spend the rest of your eternity in this perfect place. Suffering is part of life. It is the four noble truths that is based upon Buddhism. So to understand your suffering, to figure out how to overcome your suffering, how to deal with your suffering, how to understand it, that is the trip for enlightenment. If you're going to fall back on the default position, well, if I'm just a good person, when I die, I'll go to heaven, you're not doing yourself justice on trying to be the better you, the better you are. So for me to fall upon a position where, well, if I'm a good person, I die, I'm going to go to heaven. And, in Christianity, for example, and if I sin, and I pray for forgiveness and I bring Jesus into my heart, I'll make it to heaven. It shouldn't be that way. You shouldn't have to fall upon that kind of a doctrine to make yourself, a better person. You shouldn't have that stigma of heaven or hell upon you to make yourself a better person. You should want to do that yourself, to better yourself every day. And that is one of the faults I have with Christianity and Islam, is their notion of heaven and hell. The if I'm a good person, I'm going to heaven. If I'm not a good person, I'm going to hell. It doesn't make sense to me. That's one of the reasons I didn't go into Christianity when I was looking for belonging, is because of those concepts, there. And the fact that, I'll just quick tangent here. The fact that two beings created what the rest of the world is going to be for, eternity or until the end of the days, that you're suffering in sin because two people flawed in the Garden of Eden, that doesn't make any sense to me either. It's like, why is everyone else being punished for the sake of two people? It's those are the things that have actually turned me away from Christianity and more towards Buddhism, where Buddhism is more of a self-enlightenment, a road to a better path for yourself. So when it comes to when heaven and hell, I can't get behind it. I can't see it. But like I said, I don't have an issue if that's what you believe, as long as, like I said before, you're not dogmatic and trying to force it down other people's throats.
Raven has just informed us that it's your birthday, Jay.
Well, yeah. Yep.
Happy
Well, actually,
birthday.
it will be in 6 hours, but for me, since I work third shift, it is the 26th. Because my birthday, because I run the third shift, so my night actually starts at like 11 o'clock, 9 o'clock, depending on what day. So yeah, technically for me it's my birthday, but it actually isn't for 6 hours. But thank you.
Okay. Anyone have any comments on what Jay had to say before we move on to Stephen?
I'll just mention that I've also in my, for about 40 some years, I've been involved in a group that's was called the Taoist Tai Chi Society. Now it's the Feng Legok Institute of Taoism, and they are a school that honors the three great religions in China: Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism. And I know that a lot of their activity beyond the Tai Chi, they do a lot of chanting, and they have the rituals that Chinese often have, and prayers to the chanting to the gods, and just recently they asked for people to roll money. In the Chinese tradition, often you will burn money for your ancestors to have something to spend in the afterlife, and they even burn paper cars and paper houses. It's to me, it's almost not what the afterlife is, but with that group of people, with that organization, it's a relationship that you continue to have with your dead ancestors. There's something that's, for them, it's not about them personally. It's about continuing a relationship that they had with their parents, with their grandparents, and it's somehow a way of honoring the memory of those people, or the sense that there's something about them that's still alive. So I just wanted to throw that in from that that three religions temple perspective.
Yeah, it's loosely referred to as ancestor worship.
Okay. Steve, what are your thoughts?
Well, is heaven real? I guess the answer to that, my answer to that, is dependent entirely upon what is it we think of as heaven. If it's this streets of gold kind of place where everybody is overjoyed and there's no bad weather and there's no annoying neighbors and you can eat 0-calorie donuts all day, I don't believe that for one instant. Nor do I believe that that heaven, if there is such a place at all, has anything to do with a reward for being a good person. And that gets me into what I think is an interesting question is, if a person does believe in heaven, whether it is via a conventional religion or not, does that necessitate belief in hell? If you believe in one, must you believe in the other? And what I've found is that the notion of hell, to me, is a non-starter. If we believe in any kind of deity, any kind at all, the notion of hell is blasphemy. Blasphemy is the term used in theology to describe the portrayal of God in a demeaning or vile or insulting way. And the notion of hell is blasphemous. Hell is not anything that has anything to do with God. It has entirely to do with the sickest kinds of fantasies that vengeful, angry people have in their own minds. This is what I believe. Now, having said that, and understanding that I'm not a believer in any conventional way, I don't rule out the possibility that there is some kind of cosmic entity in the universe. But if such an entity exists, it is not the character called God in the Bible, because I find that character entirely too human, prone to anger, prone to fits of genocidal rage, jealousy, making errors left and right. So no, that entity is too human for me to accept as God. Nonetheless, do I think that heaven could be real? Perhaps, and I'll explain what it is that I think might be real. Doug, as you know from having read my book, the final section of it is where I present certain views that are of a spiritual, not religious, but of a spiritual nature. And for me, spirituality is a very simple concept. It is my sense of connection to other sentient life, human, animal, any sentient life, such that how I treat others reflects back at me because we're connected. And it is kind of like the mechanism, as I see it, for compassion or empathy. I can't prove it's true. The web of sentience that I envision is not a physical entity that can be demonstrated or proven. I could be completely wrong about it, but this is how I see it. That's for life on Earth. We are connected. It's possible also that there is a kind of higher level, a meta version of spirituality, in which what I've done and what I've learned throughout the course of my life contributes to the ongoing evolution of a cosmic level of mindfulness that connects all sentience. This I found, kind of to my surprise, is not that different from the thoughts of the Catholic theologian and scientist Teilhard de Chardin, talking about the cosmic Christ, the Omega point, toward which all of creation is pointed. So it's possible that cosmic mindfulness exists, and if there's an afterlife, it is that whatever I have lived in my life, whatever I have contributed in terms of nurturing aliveness in others, in living by reason and compassion, that becomes a facet of this evolving cosmic mindfulness. So if I live on at all, it is in the influence that I have had in this life. And that doesn't mean Steve Tiger continues to exist. Hi, here I am. I'm going to live forever. Actually, the notion of living forever is appalling to me. I'm not sure that I can honestly say that I would find the notion of eternal life in heaven all that different from the notion of eternal life in hell. I think that they would both be hellish. When I was younger, much younger, I may have had some fear of death. Now I don't. As I think it was Jay who said that, the universe got along perfectly well without me for uncounted eons, and it will get along perfectly well without me for uncounted eons after my physical life. And I didn't miss being alive before I was born. I'm not going to miss being alive after I'm dead. But it's possible that there is such a thing as evolving cosmic mindfulness in which the essence of my life would live on as a facet of that consciousness. So that would be my answer. Again, I'm not asserting that that's true. It's something I suspect may be true. No evidence for it whatsoever. Can't prove it, so I don't proselytize for it. It's just a thought that I have.
Okay. Let me unmute Doug. There we go. Okay. Anyone want to comment directly on what Steve had to say?
I like those.
Okay. My own personal thoughts on heaven are these. I was a believer for a very long time. I was raised, I was born into a family that was Catholic when I was very young, but my parents left the Catholic Church when I was 7, and they left it over the issue of birth control because they wanted to use birth control, and the Catholic Church was very much against that. And so then our home was more agnostic than anything else. At 16, I had some friends at school told me about Christianity. And at the time, I was going through some things that made it attractive to me. And so I became a believer. And I was a believer for 42 years. My kids went to Christian schools. I went on mission trips. I sang in the choir. I taught Sunday school. I had home Bible studies. But it all started falling apart for me as I started noticing a lot of inconsistencies. One of the first major inconsistencies that I saw was because of the election of President Trump, and seeing his inconsistency and how so many other people would follow along with what he had to say. My own pastor at the Baptist church I attended was making comments about, why do I have to be politically correct? And then in the next breath, he's saying, go out and tell all your friends about Jesus. And I'm thinking, how can I possibly tell someone about Jesus if I'm not doing it in terms that they don't find offensive? To me, a Christian should be the first person in line asking, what is the politically correct term to use here? And so I left that church, but I didn't leave the faith at that point. And I went back at that point to the Presbyterian church, which I found more in line with how I felt, but there were still some inconsistencies that I was finding, and heaven was one of them. The whole idea that we live here, and if you believe, you're going to go to heaven, and if you don't believe, you go to hell, and you don't get a choice in the matter after you die. You have to make you have to decide whether you believe or not right here. That just didn't seem like anything that a loving God would do. And I had also bought into Calvinism for a long time, and the Calvinists say that those who are saved are the elect, and God determines the elect, has determined the elect before the beginnings of the earth. And if that's the case, why is he making all these people that he destined for hell before he even created them? That doesn't make any sense either. But then when my daughter started showing me some things about how Noah's Ark could not possibly have been as it was portrayed in the Bible, and this is what finally broke my faith, because I'd always been taught that the Bible is the inerrant word of God, and clearly it wasn't. And if you start from the position that this is inerrant, once you find one error, it's out the window. And I just chucked all of it. God, heaven, the whole works.
Well, if I may say so, what you said, Kelly, reflects a very common phenomenon that I see, which is that people conflate faith in God and faith in the book, the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
If you place your primary faith in a book, that's something that I find idolatrous, because a book is a tangible object. So
that's really interesting.
It's a point that I stress in my book. If your primary faith is in the Bible, you will believe what the Bible says, no matter what it says. So Bible-based believers will say, well, this is true about God because the Bible says so. Mm-hmm. They will never say, that's not true about God, and I don't care what the Bible says. And this is why you get into these situations where apologists are having to explain away and justify things like acts of serial genocide and infanticide as depicted in the Hebrew Scriptures, because they're starting from the position that the Bible is the basis of faith. So if the Bible is the basis of faith, if you lose your faith in the Bible because you find, well, that's not right, that's simply a wrong statement in the Bible. If you lose your faith in the Bible, however, it does not necessarily mean that you have lost your faith in God. It is possible to believe in God and also to believe that the Bible was a human-authored compendium of the hopes and fears and fantasies of men from the ancient Near East, trying to express their sense of God.
Okay, I think Doug might want to say something. Did you, Doug?
Well, I was still excited over the calorie-free donuts that Steve was talking about. so that is got me pumped up right now. Wow, there's a lot to take in there. I think I'd probably like to address the notion of hell first, and then I would like to address the notion of the Bible. And so first off, I look at and we always talk about God being very loving and gracious God, and grace is extended. And I look at people, and we could have two sides of this debate, to where I'll just take the one that comes to my mind, Jeffrey Epstein. Okay, what a deplorable human being, absolutely deplorable. And so, one, we could ask the question, how could a loving God allow that human to exist? And how could we allow that human to live in and how he bought his way basically out of the first trial, and it took years, okay, for the second trial, and a lot of it was because he was wealthy. And then he's in jail for 3 days and commits suicide, which again could be another topic about whether or not that was suicide, or way too many powerful politicians don't want him to talk. So, but that's another day. I think that I don't have a problem of hell for him, just because of the life that he lived. And if there is a God, and again, why that being allowed him to live the way he did, I don't know. But since I do believe that there is a God and that he is loving, he loves justice. And so there would, 3 days in jail could never, okay, suffice, okay, for what he has done. And we could apply that to we could think of 10 leaders in this world. I just finished the Netflix special on the most wanted people in the world. Okay, truly horrible human beings. And so since I'm coming from the premise that there is a God, and that God is loving, and that God does love justice, then there would have to be a place for Epstein, okay, that would rightfully correct his wrongs. Now, how that would look, I don't know. Is it a literal burning for the rest of all eternity? Okay. Again, when we put a face and a name on it, sometimes we look at it in that context and go, yeah, I mean, again, we're coming from anger here and from injustice, and we look at his life and go, yeah, he absolutely deserves it. There's nothing about his life that was good. And so I do believe that since there is a heaven, there would have to be a hell. And would it be like Dante's Inferno? I'm not sure. I don't know if it would, if it's a literal constant burning, then that doesn't seem just, because you look at, I think it was, I can't remember if it was Hitchens or if it was one of the four atheists: Hitchens, Dawkins, Sam
Harris.
Sam Harris, and
Jordan Peterson.
Who was the last one?
I said Jordan Peterson, but I don't know if that's right.
I think it's Daniel Dennett.
Okay.
Yeah, Daniel Dennett. Thank you. The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. No, I'm just teasing. I think it was Hitchens who was having a debate with another with a priest, I believe. And he said, looking at the priest, and he said, "Are you willing to tell the woman who survived Holocaust and who went through all of that and lost her faith in God because of what was going on, and then lived a life that was good, and as she died, if you're there holding her hand, are you really going to condemn that person to hell?" And I used to be able to say without a doubt, I know. And I can't say that anymore. Because someone even asked me, they said, "So you're 100% sure there's a God?" No, I've never seen him or her. Okay, the being is spiritual. I've never seen on the other side. Do I believe that there's a spiritual part? Yes, just like with what Steve talked about. There is a spiritual side. That is something that there has to be something outside of us, and that is something that I feel very few people actually try to debate. There's not a something spiritual. Now, on the inerrancy of God's word, I am along the same lines with you, Kelly. There are some parts of the Bible that are difficult. There are parts that, I have read. There are parts that I have read that I go, there's no way that this is good. In fact, the reason why I went to seminary was to get some of those answers, and some of the best scholars that read the best scholars go, Numbers 31 is difficult, and more than difficult, it's repulsive. And then we also go to Judges 19 through 22. And part of it, we wonder, is this prescriptive in how things should be? Or is it descriptive in how things were? And so then we really have to be able to sit down and actually go through those parts. I read Judges 19 through 22 at a Bible study at our church a few months ago. Or not a few months ago, sorry. I'm still thinking, we haven't been in our church since March. So yeah, this was a while ago. And after I read all the way through, I had a couple of members say, I have never read that part of the Bible. Because it's nasty. Now I have beliefs, and I have ways to now, like with looking at Egypt, okay, and hardening Pharaoh's heart, or looking at Deuteronomy, or looking at Exodus 21, or looking at slavery as a whole in the Old Testament and the New, and to be able to fully understand it and to be able to explain it all away. No, I can't. I still don't know, and I'm still looking. But it's not a blind faith. That is just, I'm going to close my eyes to the bad parts and then just open them up when it says God is love and God is good. Okay, no, you got to look at all of it. And so is your story common? It's very common. And I'm sorry about that, because I feel that as a pastor, so many times I get told that I need to preach what's wrong and get people right. And I don't believe that. I don't believe that's my role. I don't believe that that's manipulation. And I don't mind about preaching on wrongs. But I think that our church as a whole needs I think it needs some hard teaching, some hard looking at Scripture to realize that the Bible as a whole has a whole lot more human fingerprints on it than what a lot of Christians think. And so it's definitely has, and like with what Steve said, is that it has passed through some hands, and some of those people we do know, some of them we don't. And when you try to just lump it in as it's completely inerrant, and then when you find out that First Chronicles, Second Chronicles does not line up with First Kings and Second Kings, and it's about the same Jewish people. One is about the 10 tribes of the north, one is about Judah, and they don't match up. And you even have discrepancies within those two books, supposedly written by the same person. So yeah, there are some parts that I struggle with, but I think what helped me in that area was Peter Enns' book called Incarnation and Inspiration and Incarnation. To where just as Jesus was the incarnate God, again, I know I'm making assertions here and this is going beyond our text, but just as God was in human form, okay, well, the Bible is the human form of how we understand God and how we know God more. And so, but with that human form, Christ had he would get frustrated. He was hungry. He was tired. Okay. He had those things that he struggled with. So yet at the same time, we open up that Bible and we know that God is, that there's the humanity to the Bible. And so there are going to be parts that are difficult and parts that are difficult to interpret. And that's what requires more study and more learning and more understanding, and not you're wrong and you're going to hell. I would like to bring up what an atheist. I forgive me if I mispronounce his name. Lob Zizek. Does that sound familiar? He's from Lithuania, and he writes about. And this is I guess what I truly desire out of Christians, is that he comes across a woman during, again, one of the tough things about Christianity is how we've acted since with slavery, the Crusades, the Inquisitions, the things that fall on us that are difficult. And he says he's walking through a town led by St. Louis, and Brenton reported that he encountered an old woman who was walking with two bowls, one bowl of fire and one bowl of water. And he says, why are you carrying those two bowls around? And she says, one, I want to burn the idea of paradise away. And the water was meant to quench the hellfires. Because she says, I don't want anyone to come to God because of the reward or in fear of the punishment. I want them to come to God because of a love for him. And so Zizek claimed that was an atheist mindset. And he said it was a Christian, it was a Christian concept, but we more live it out than Christians do. And I disagree with him a little bit about that. But I believe in that the Christian life is meant to be lived not in woohoo, I get a big home in heaven, but no, I get to be in the presence of God because of a grace that was extended to me. And I humbly now tell you about it and would love for you to see what this is like. And so anyway, thank you. Oh, and somebody was asking what type of pastor I am. I'm a bad one. Okay. That's okay. I'm a boring one. I am the cure for insomnia. I promise you that. You come to one of my services, you'll be right out. So anyway, I'm thinking of selling tapes and a pew, and because I mean that's what naturally helps people go to sleep anyway. So just put this in your house, turn me on, and you'll be out in no time.
Okay.
So I do have a couple questions for you, Doug. First off, what is so wrong about death that people have to find an excuse or a reason to act a certain way? You know, whether to act good to go to heaven or be bad to go to hell. What is so wrong with death? Death is inevitable. Everything dies. There's no escaping it. why do we have to, especially for the Christians, why do you have to have a place to go after death that you have to make yourself a good person on it? But I'll come back to that. Just as, we'll let you that one. The other question is why God themselves? What is it about God that makes Christians so want to be in His presence? If He allows things like Steve said before, and like you mentioned before, things like Epstein or genocide or the Crusades, what is it that makes the actual believers so want to be in His presence, even knowing He's allowed and caused these atrocities to happen? You're still, and Charlie, you can answer this too. What is it about Him that brings people that will just brush off? Well, he believed in Jesus, so he's going to be in heaven, or this thing. What is it about that makes you guys still want to go to heaven to be with God?
I'll go with an answer from my perspective. There's a couple of things I'd say. I guess is I agree with Stephen on the Bible and how the Bible is an object that has passed through a lot of hands. I've read a book called The Crucifixion of the Warrior God by Gregory Boyd, and he walks through the Bible in one lens, in that if we believe that John is true and Jesus says no one has seen God, but the God who comes from the bosom of the Father has revealed him. Greg takes that point and says, if you look back through the Bible and you don't see the self-sacrificial love that Jesus showed by dying for all of humanity, if you don't see that in the depictions of God throughout the Bible, then something else is going on. And that makes that kind of one anchor makes a lot of sense to me. That also Paul says that the Old Testament has become obsolete. That it's not our book; it was a book written for the Israelites, and yet it's useful for teaching and for understanding how that group of people had to separate themselves and become a people that they had all these rules and stuff like that. So my sense of I guess my sense of God and my sense of understanding why would someone want to be good in this life to please God in the next life? I don't think that's what Jesus's message was. If I looked at the kingdom of heaven, I just researched the kingdom of heaven in the Bibles, and about a third of the references to the kingdom of heaven was Jesus telling stories, was telling parables. And all of his parables most of them were not about the afterlife. They were about a way of being in the world now with people. It's his sense of the kingdom and the kingdom of heaven was, how are we right now? It kind of goes back to what Stephen was saying, that the way we interact with people here and now becomes how we live out kingdom in society now.
Yeah, if I may just interject one thought. Kingdom of heaven, as spoken by Jesus, is completely consistent, Charlie, with what you just said, from the Gospel of Luke, where Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is within you, or some people translate it as among you.
Mm-hmm.
But just as you said, it has to do with what's going on right here in living people and how they treat each other.
Mm-hmm. And we get the parable of Lazarus and the rich man, and I don't think that's a definition of what hell is like, that there's this unfathomable gap between heaven and hell. I think that was a lesson for the rich man at that time, to act differently in life, not to wish for something else in the afterlife. I've been aware of a couple of things. There's a couple of books that I've heard from podcasts recently. There's one called Raising Hell, raising with an S, like getting rid of it, like mowing hell down, by Sharon Putt Baker. And she mentioned one thing that I've had a bit of a look at. She said fire in the Bible is not fire as we understand it, as a destructive element. Fire in the Bible was a thing for guidance. It was a thing for purification, and it was a thing for making things sacred. And I looked at fire just briefly and saw that those elements about fire and hell, I think more of it's coming from Dante's Inferno about what hell is really like, or what we believe hell to be, than coming from Scripture. The other one is I read.
Revelation is pretty clear about the lake of fire, and that
Yeah.
people are being thrown in the lake of fire.
And that was reserved for Satan, the beast, and those who worship the beast. To me, that sense was that people who are committed to a destructive way of being, God won't usurp their decision making. That if it's mostly, and I don't believe in Satan so much as there's a spirit of division and selfishness that is destroyed. I also, the last thing I want to say is I heard an interview with an Orthodox Christian, and he said something that really struck me quite deeply, and it goes to stuff that Greg Boyd says as well. He said, if at, and this is just conjecture, but I think the understanding of what this means, if you're in heaven and there's someone in hell, like your cousin or your uncle or your mother or your father, that because they didn't do the right things or choose the right things, if one person in heaven says, I'm going to give up my place in heaven so that that person in hell can come out of hell, he says at that point hell will cease to exist. That it's not about separating one group of people from another based on whether they chose Jesus or whatever the tenets of salvation are. That attitude of, if I'm willing to give up my life in eternity to save someone from a life of pain, it's that sensibility in a person that if that existed, then hell would not exist. That became pretty powerful to me as an idea. And again, I don't believe, I'm not sure that I believe that there is a heaven and a hell. I certainly don't believe in eternal conscious punishment. I believe that there might be an eternal fire. The other thing that Revelation says is that the gates of heaven are always open. And if everyone's dead and has gone to their respective places, why would the gates need to be open still? Why is that? There's things that we need to look closely about what's been taught about heaven and hell, that we might have ideas that are not consistent with Scripture.
Well, since Scripture is not consistent with itself, that's inevitable.
Mm-hmm.
Kelly, you had mentioned Revelation and the lake of fire. And an interesting point, one of the things in Revelation is the concept of a second death.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that there is a kind of minority doctrine held by some Christians that there is hell, there is damnation, but it's not eternal. And presumably, this is to get around again, I'll use the term blasphemy, the blasphemous notion that God inflicts eternal, infinite punishment for finite crimes, and sometimes for the crime of not believing.
If God is love, that is not a loving God.
Of course not. That's a monster God. So these Christians have devised, taking their lead from Revelation in reference to the second death, have devised the doctrine that's come to be known as annihilationism, which is that there is damnation, but it's not permanent. That after a time, God simply destroys the damned, or maybe the damned then get another chance to.
That's the position that I went to, was that the damned got another chance.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the notion of annihilationism, it reveals how uncomfortable believers themselves are with their own doctrines about damnation, because it's just so completely contradictory to what they have been taught and what they think of about God, what they want to believe about God. But if you stop and think about this particular doctrine, it's not really much of an improvement, because if the idea is that the damned stay in hell where they're tormented, not forever, but for some time, I don't know whether it's 3 minutes or 3 million years or whatever time it is, and then they're given another chance, then if they accept salvation, they have been coerced into it through torture. How valid is that? And if they're not going to accept it, and God being omniscient should know the answer anyway, what was the point of torturing them at all in hell? What's the purpose of hell? You're going to torture them for a while, and then once they've learned their lessons, I'll kill them? That's not God. That's just a kind of a silly notion. But I think that people embraced it because it gave them a way to avoid the blasphemous notion of a loving God inflicting infinite punishment on finite crimes.
The other issue I had was, do you even really have a choice? Because if you believe, it's because you're convinced that this is true. And if you don't believe, it's because you are not convinced that it is true. You don't choose what you believe. And anyone that says that they do, I ask them, well, all right, choose to believe in Santa Claus. There. Now, do you believe in Santa Claus? No, you believe what you are convinced of is true. And so if you're not convinced, how did you ever have a choice?
Exactly. I mean, you can believe something if your mind is open to evidence, but we're not dealing with a topic that's evidence-based now. But the point you just made, that belief is not volitional, that was acknowledged by Blaise Pascal, he of the famous wager. He acknowledged that you can't choose what you believe. You can choose to act as if you believe something, but you can't actually choose belief. And he was honest enough. He was a fine scientist as well as a religious philosopher. And he was honest enough to acknowledge that this was a problem in his wager. His only solution, unfortunately, was for non-believers to act as if they did believe, go to the church, accept the sacraments, and so on, until the disease of non-belief was cured, which to me is self-hypnosis. But the point, Kelly, the point you raised, that belief is not volitional, is absolutely valid. And I remember you said earlier today that you had been raised in a Calvinist, or you had some
I do, yeah. I have a little bit of just about everything, partly because for the first 13 years of marriage, my husband was active duty Army. And since we moved every couple of years, we had to find a new church, and there's different denominations available in different areas. So we ended up going to a lot of different churches.
Yeah, well, I mean, Calvinism represented another example of, with its doctrine of predestination, to do with whether you were a decent person or not a decent person.
Mm-hmm.
This is another thing that a lot of Christians could not accept. And so almost as soon as Calvin, who basically I see as the 1,000-year later descendant of Augustine, and a lot of people could not accept that. For one thing, it makes proselytizing completely irrelevant. And so almost as soon as Calvin announced these doctrines, Jacob Arminius announced his Calvinism light theology, which gives a little wiggle room to the notion of whether everything is completely preordained.
There's another theory called universalism, I believe, Stephen, and that's that ultimately God will purify all people, even people such as Hitler, that there will be a purification process in the afterlife, and all people will go to heaven. Rob Bell has written a book about this called Love Wins. I haven't read it, but he was criticized because the evangelical sense of that you have to make a decision to be saved, and if you don't, then you're out of, who's in, who's out kind of thing. Universalism basically says all people are in, but there's a process of purification, and still the choice of the individual, even in the afterlife, is their own choice to make. We can't. If we don't choose ourselves, then we're automatrons of some sort. That's the predestination thing. Nobody has a choice. God has already chosen. We're just robots.
Yeah. You see, what I had described earlier, my unprovable spiritual belief in cosmic mindfulness, and maybe the positive aspects of my life become permanent facets of that. There is no hell in that kind of scenario. And rather, it is that cosmic mindfulness is entirely, in my thoughts, a positive concept. It's light. And an individual whose life has been all, or mostly darkness, a life of cruelty and crime and whatever, contributes little or nothing to spiritual aliveness in the world. And so that person has little or no presence in cosmic mindfulness. It has to do, so my vision is not about heaven or hell, salvation or damnation. It's how much aliveness did I nurture in this world is reflective of how much of a facet of cosmic mindfulness my experiences will constitute. So those who contribute nothing, those whose lives are all darkness, they're not going to contribute much to an entity of light.
And that's what brings you to the slogan that I have adopted as Godless Granny's slogan, which is live your life. Well, we are coming up on 90 minutes very quickly here, so I'm going to give everyone a chance for some closing thoughts. We have not heard quite as much from Jay as we have from some people, so I'm going to let Jay go first in giving us some closing thoughts.
There's a lot of things I don't understand on the concept of heaven, hell, God, stuff like that, because I'm not coming from a place where a lot of people come from, especially in our community of faith to start with. So I don't understand the concept of heaven and hell and why you have to strive to go there and why you have to be in the presence of this great being. I didn't grow up with it. I haven't studied it. I've studied a little bit, but I haven't gone into great details. A lot of times a lot of the study for a while was just trying to show that certain parts weren't accurate. I didn't really delve too much into the spiritual aspect of it, but I don't, like I said before, there's nothing wrong with death. There's nothing wrong with dying. And that there should be nothing feared because everything dies. Everything will go away at some point. So to hold on to something, because a lot of believers will wholeheartedly believe that when they die they're going to heaven, they'll stand before God. What if you're wrong? What if it's not heaven? What if it's Valhalla or the Elysian fields or nothing? Or you're reborn as a rabbit. What then? What if you're wrong? And a lot of Christians, especially, since the topic is heaven, we'll stick with the Christians. what if you're wrong? What if you've spent your entire life believing and striving for something that isn't true? Now, on the flip point on that, what if I'm wrong? What if you're right and I'm wrong? And my entire existence, or Granny's, or even Steve's, trying to disprove God or fight against, the Christian bullies and whatnot. What if they are all right and we're all wrong? And so in that aspect, since we're non-believers, are we going to hell because we didn't believe it, because we weren't taught the same things you were taught, or we don't believe the same things you believe? There's a problem there for me. The aspect that just because I'm not a believer, I'm going to go to hell doesn't sit well for me. It was one of the things, like I said before, on different occasions, is one of the things that kept me away from believing in God, is the fact that just because I don't believe in God, I'm going to spend eternity in hell. Or I've heard other people say, well, until I believe. What about, say, like the tribe in the Amazon that killed that Christian minister that came down to preach to them? Are they going to hell because they've never heard of God? How about a baby that was born and died minutes after it was born? Are they going to hell because they didn't get a chance to believe in God? Those are the things I can't get behind. Those are the things I don't understand why people believe it. And those are the reasons, just some of the reasons I can't personally believe in a heaven or hell. Because to believe in a heaven or hell means you have to believe in a deity that allows or does the things that he already knows is going to happen. Because remember, he's all knowing, all powerful. He knows what happened at the beginning of the time and the end of time. So therefore, we're stuck in a loop that we can't break from. And that's my thought. That's my experiences is God knows I'm not a believer. If God is real, he knows I'm not a believer. So therefore, I'm already destined to go to hell because I don't believe.
Okay. Thank you, Jay.
So,
Doug, closing thoughts.
Well, I just want to say, first off, happy birthday to Jay. Hope you have a great day. There were some comments along the side. I think I may have said that the Inquisition is difficult. I didn't mean that the Inquisition was difficult. It was horrible. That was a horrible act of Christianity. And it's something that, again, we have a very, very hard time trying to explain how those people in the so-called name of God were doing those atrocities, and how many things have been done in the name of God are absolutely atrocious. Junk Shop Library was very upset that we didn't fight. Okay, all right. So I'm sorry about that. Maybe if we, I'm not. Well, anyway, I've enjoyed this, and thank you for this opportunity. Anyway, somebody did ask this one question about why would I want to be in God's presence? Is he really that much of an egotist that he would just want me to come and hang out with him? I think that's where it comes from, that, again, from the premise that there is a God, that God is creator, and that God has created, and I want to search, okay, for that being. And because I have seen the amazing things that take place inside of the cell, to the amazing things that take place in the universe, to the amazing things that take place here on earth, that where why do we want to try to be good and do good? And I think where it comes from is that it comes from meaning. And I think that's why I'm a believer, is because it gives not a false, and again, some people say, oh, it's just a false meaning. Well, that's antithetical. A false meaning, you're automatically going by a premise that it's couldn't happen, but yet still be fantastic. And I think the meaning that I get from it does make me want to do better, does make me want to do more, because if this God created in such a way, then I want to honor that being back. And so that's it. And thank you for having me on here.
Okay, thank you very much. Charlie.
Final thoughts. I've spent a lot of time in the last 15 years asking the Christian question: if you don't believe in Jesus, does that mean you don't go to heaven or hell? There's 2 points in the gospel, especially Matthew 25. It's the final judgment. Everybody in this story, where he separates the sheep from the goats, everyone in the story says, "Lord, Lord," and that means people who were Christian, people who weren't Christian, of every kind of religion. If there is a judgment at the end, everyone is there. All the nations are there, and the judgment isn't about whether you believed or not. It's about whether you were good to people, whether you helped the needy, whether you fed the hungry, whether you gave thirsty people something to drink. So the judgment at that point isn't about belief in Jesus or God or anything. It's about how did you live your life? What was it? As I said at the beginning, is what you believe does what you believe change the way you live? And the judge will be, if we believe the story, the judge will be someone who has experienced what it's like to be a human, has experienced a limitation on everything that he would have as God. And I don't believe that it's a separation of Christians and non-Christians if there is a heaven and hell. It's probably more like Stephen had alluded to, is that if your life, if how you live somehow crystallizes something good in the consciousness or the light consciousness of humanity, then that will be rewarded. That will become part of what heaven is. I don't believe God is something I'm looking for later on. Like Jesus, or like Paul says, a line from another faith, in God we live and move and have our beings. We are in God. This reality is God. This reality is heaven. We can make it heaven, we can make it hell. If we think that we don't want judgment at the end of this life, look at how we are these days with the tendency of humanity is to judge others. We're judging all the time. And then we think, well, we don't want any judgment at the end of our life because I don't want that thing. But I think what we are called to do in this life is to live a life that is loving, and if that sense of loving and being of service to others has some effect on who we are after we die, or the energy that we have embedded in the universe after we die, and that's what I believe in. Stephen, I think we see the evidence of the good things that humanity has done all the way through history. We stand on the backs of people who invented language. We stand on the backs of tool makers, of people who developed farming. Life has a continuity that we contribute to, that we contribute lovingly to or not. And I think that's the job. It's not to please some deity in the future. It's to live well now.
Yes.
Okay, Steve.
Well, the topic was, is heaven real? And I think ultimately that's a kind of a proxy question for, is judgment real? Is there such a thing as judgment? Is that how we view God? Assuming people do believe in God in some way or another, do we associate that God with being a judge who will send us to one fate or the other after we die? And I think, as I've tried to make clear, No, I don't see God that way at all. If God exists at all, as I said, it is as cosmic mindfulness, representing the positive things that all living sentient creatures have contributed to the world. The experiences, the knowledge gained, the way we have helped and nurtured others. So in that way, first of all, there is no hell. There's just greater or lesser degrees of presence in cosmic mindfulness. And nor is there another subject we didn't get into at all. Well, heaven and hell are for humans only because animals don't have souls. Well, I don't think so. Sentient animals.
Yeah, I can't agree with that one.
You know, we are all sentient animals. We all have the capacity to live by reason and compassion. Even non-human animals have some capacity for that. Once you get down to things like tarantulas and so on, I don't know. It's not my place to say. But clearly, the notion of God as a judge, sending some people to a good place and other people to a bad place, no, I don't accept that at all. Not even a little. I think that is an unworthy way to think of a deity. If you're going to believe in a deity at all, that deity should be godlike. And the notion of a judge is so human. You know, I don't like what that person did. Off to hell with him. You know, no, I don't think so. So anyway, I very much appreciate the opportunity to have participated in this discussion. And so I thank you, Granny, and Kelly, and all the others who are here for making this a quite enjoyable and lively talk.
I have found this a very interesting discussion as well. I really welcome Charlie and Doug's perspective because I have never heard a pastor from a Christian church before say that they didn't believe everything in the Bible. That was really a new idea to me. I've seen that idea. I've seen that idea expressed by people who were not pastors, you know, particularly recently by a young woman who is a seminary student. And, you know, obviously from people like Bart Ehrman, who are seminary professors. But so that was definitely a very interesting perspective for me. And so with that, I want to thank all of you for being here. I want to thank everyone in the chat. You've had some interesting comments. It's been fun. And we will try to get another balanced panel like this again on another time. So thank you all for joining me, and bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Kelly. Thanks, everyone.